Somewhere beneath the streets of Rome, behind walls that haven't been opened in centuries, there are rooms filled with secrets. And not the kind of secrets governments hide about wars or money. These are older, much, much older. And they have the power to change everything we think we know about human history. It's one of the most restricted libraries on Earth. Imagine 53 miles of shelving, holding documents that go back over 1,000 years. Papal letters, trial records, maps drawn by explorers who sailed into unknown waters. The Vatican officially calls it the Apostolic Archive now, but for centuries, it was known by another name, the Secret Archive. And that name wasn't just for show. That year, a young researcher from Austria, let's call her Anna, got a job there. Her task seemed straightforward enough. The Vatican had decided to digitize some of its oldest manuscripts. Thousands of crumbling pages needed to be photographed, cataloged, and preserved before they turned to dust. It was the kind of work that sounds incredibly exciting for about a week, and then becomes a tedious routine. Day after day, she was in climate-controlled rooms, handling documents written in languages most people have never even heard of. Anna was brilliant. She'd studied medieval history for years. She was fluent in Latin, Greek, and even knew some Arabic. She'd written papers on forgotten monasteries and lost trade routes. For her, this job was the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to touch history directly. Old letters, church records, land disputes from the 13th century. Important to historians, sure, but not the kind of thing that would shake the world. Then she found the door. It was behind a massive shelf in one of the lower storage rooms, the kind of forgotten corner that gets visited maybe once a decade. She'd been sent to retrieve a box of documents from the 1400s, something about a bishop's correspondence. The old wooden shelf had shifted slightly over the years, creating a small gap behind it, just enough to see that there was something back there a wall that didn't match the others. The stones were different. They looked much, much older. They didn't belong to the same building. Now, in a place like the Vatican Archives, you don't just go moving furniture and knocking on walls. There are strict rules, endless protocols. The correct thing to do would have been to report it and let someone else handle it. But something made her curious. It was the way the wall looked, almost ancient. It felt out of place. So she came back that night. Her digitization work gave her late access to the archives. The halls were silent. Nobody else was around. With a huge effort, she managed to move the heavy shelf. And there it was. A door, but not a regular door. It was small, barely 4 feet high, made of iron that had turned black with age. There was no handle, no knob, just a single keyhole, shaped like nothing she had ever seen before. Most of them knew nothing, or at least they said they knew nothing. He whispered that some parts of the archive were older than the Vatican itself, older even than ancient Rome. He said the church had built on top of something that was already there, something they wanted to keep hidden forever. He wouldn't say another word. A week later, he was abruptly transferred to a different position. Anna never saw him again. His warning only fueled her search. She found almost nothing. Almost. There was one single entry, buried deep in a maintenance log from 1847. It mentioned repairs to a door in the lower eastern section. The log stated the door had been sealed by order of the prefect and was never to be opened without direct papal permission. That was it. One sentence, written almost 200 years ago, but it was enough. It proved that whatever was behind that door, it wasn't just forgotten storage. She searched records from the 1700s, the 1600s, going back as far as she possibly could. And slowly, like a picture coming into focus, pieces started to connect. She found faint references to documents that were considered too dangerous to destroy, but too sensitive to ever allow into circulation. She found mentions of strange artifacts brought back from Egypt, from Persia, from places the church had sent missionaries centuries ago. And always the same Latin phrase appeared again and again, ad oblivionum. It means something like for forgetting, or into oblivion. She realized it gradually. There was a system. For over 1,000 years, the church had been collecting things, not just religious texts. They were collecting scientific documents, historical records, maps, objects, anything that contradicted the official teachings of the time. Anything that suggested human history was far longer, far stranger, and far more complex than anyone was supposed to know. And instead of destroying these things, which would have been the easy choice, they kept them, they hid them, they preserved them, but they never, ever shared them. Why? Why would they do that? Why keep something secret for centuries, instead of just burning it and being done with it? She wrestled with that question for a long time. And the only answer that made any sense was this: they kept it because they believed it was true. You don't go to such great lengths to protect lies. You protect truth, especially a truth that frightens you to your very core. Anna never got through that iron door. A few weeks after she started her deep dive, her access to the lower levels was quietly revoked. No explanation was given. She was moved to a different section and assigned to photograph medieval tax records. Boring work. Safe work. The kind of work that keeps curious people busy without letting them find anything important. But she wasn't leaving empty-handed. Before her access was cut, she managed to photograph something crucial. It was a single page from an old ledger she found in a forgotten corner of the archive. The page was a list, just names and dates, written in a hand from the 1500s. But the names weren't people. They were documents. And next to each name was a location and a status. Most of them said moved to lower vault or sealed by order. But a few had brief descriptions. And one entry caught her eye more than any other. It described a codex, a bound book, brought to Rome from Constantinople after the city fell in 1453. Description said it was written in a language that predated both Latin and Greek, a language nobody could fully translate. And it contained, according to the archivist's note, a catalogue of knowledge hidden from common man since the Great Flood. The Great Flood. That phrase appears in almost every ancient culture on Earth. Mesopotamia, India, China, the Americas. We've always been told these are myths, stories people created to explain a world they didn't understand. But what if it wasn't just a story? What if something really did happen, long before recorded history began? And what if someone managed to write it all down? That single page changed everything for Anna. It was proof. The Vatican didn't just suspect there was a lost chapter of human history. They had documents describing it. They were holding them. And they had been doing so for at least 500 years. Anna left Rome a few months later. Officially, her contract had ended. Unofficially, she knew she had gotten too close to a secret she was never meant to find. But she took those photographs with her, and she started looking for others who had found similar things. Other researchers, other archivists, other people who had stumbled onto evidence that our shared history is hiding something enormous. She found more than she ever expected. This wasn't just about the Vatican. It was about libraries and institutions all over the world. The more she learned, the more she realized that the buried past isn't going to stay buried forever, and its rediscovery has already begun. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey as fascinating as I did, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what comes next. What if everything you learned about ancient history was wrong? Not slightly off, not missing a few details, but fundamentally, completely wrong. What if there was a civilization so advanced, so widespread, that it mapped the entire world thousands of years before we thought anyone could even build a boat? And what if the proof has been sitting at the bottom of the ocean this whole time, waiting for someone to look? The researcher from Austria didn't stop digging after she left Rome. She couldn't. What she had found in those archives haunted her. That single page, that list of hidden documents, mentioned something that changed her entire understanding of the past. A codex describing events from before the Great Flood, before recorded history, before everything we call civilization. She started following the trail, and that trail led her somewhere unexpected, not to another dusty archive, to the ocean floor. In 2001, a team of scientists from India's National Institute of Ocean Technology made a discovery off the coast of Gujarat, near a town called Dwarka. They were doing routine pollution studies when their sonar picked up something strange. Geometric shapes on the seabed, straight lines, right angles, the kind of patterns that don't occur in nature. They sent down cameras. What they found looked like the ruins of a city, stone walls, what appeared to be foundations of buildings, streets laid out in a grid pattern, all of it sitting under 40 meters of water, covered in silt and sea growth. The structures stretched across an area of several square miles. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The Gulf of Kamhat, where these ruins were found, was dry land during the last ice age. The sea level was much lower then, about 120 meters lower than it is today. When the ice sheets melted, starting around 12,000 years ago, the water rose. Slowly at first, then faster. Coastlines that had been home to people for thousands of years were swallowed by the ocean. The official timeline of Indian civilization says it began around 3300 BCE with the Indus Valley culture. Cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, that's about 5,300 years ago. But if the structures off the coast of Dwarka are man-made, and if they were built when that land was above water, they could be 9,000 years old. Maybe older. That would make them among the oldest evidence of organized human settlement ever found. The Indian government sent more expeditions. Divers brought up artifacts, pottery fragments, stone tools, pieces of what looked like carved wood. Carbon dating on some of these materials came back with dates ranging from 7,500 BCE to 9,500 BCE. That's older than Sumer, older than Egypt, older than anything in the accepted history books. But here's the strange part. After the initial announcements, the research went quiet. Funding dried up. The scientists who made the discovery were reassigned to other projects. Papers that were supposed to be published never appeared. The underwater city of Dwarka became a footnote, mentioned occasionally in alternative history circles, but ignored by mainstream archaeology. The Austrian researcher found references to Dwarka in the documents she had photographed in Rome, not by that name, but descriptions of a great port city that sank beneath the waves, taking its knowledge with it. The Vatican had records about this, records they had kept hidden for centuries. And Dwarka wasn't alone. Off the coast of Japan, near the island of Yonaguni, divers in 1987 found something that still sparks debate today. Massive stone structures underwater, stepped platforms that look like pyramids, flat surfaces that appear to be roads or plazas, carved features that seem too precise to be natural rock formations. Geologists argue about Yonaguni constantly. Some say it's entirely natural, formed by a process called fracturing that can create regular geometric shapes. Others point to features that seem impossible without human hands. Holes that look drilled, channels that look carved. A formation that locals call the turtle because it resembles an animal carved from stone. The land where these structures sit was above water until about 10,000 years ago. If humans built them, it happened before the end of the Ice Age, before we think anyone in that region had the technology or organization to create something so massive. Then there's the Bimini Road in the Bahamas, a half-mile stretch of limestone blocks arranged in a J-shape, sitting in shallow water near the island of North Bimini. It was discovered in 1968, and people have argued about it ever since. Natural beach rock formation, say some scientists. Ancient harbor or road, say others. The blocks are fitted together in ways that look deliberate. Some of them weigh several tons. The Bahamas, like most of the Caribbean, had much more exposed land during the Ice Age. What's shallow water today was dry ground 12,000 years ago. If the Bimini Road is man-made, it was built by people we know nothing about, people who lived in a world that looked completely different from ours. The researchers started connecting dots. Underwater structures off India, off Japan, off the Bahamas. In the Black Sea, where sonar has revealed what look like ancient shorelines and possible settlements under 150 meters of water. In the Mediterranean, where submerged ruins have been found near Greece, Egypt, and Israel, all of them dating to the same window of time. The end of the Ice Age, the period of rapid sea level rise, the time of the Great Flood. She found something else in those Vatican documents. References to an ancient people called the Khafru. The name appeared in translations of texts that supposedly came from Egypt, from Mesopotamia, from India. Different cultures, different languages, but the same name, the Khafru, the people of the water, the navigators. According to these hidden texts, the Khafru were a seafaring civilization that existed before the flood. They didn't live in one place. They sailed, they traded, they built ports along coastlines all over the world. They mapped the seas and the stars. And when the waters rose, they scattered. Some went inland and became the ancestors of later civilizations. Some stayed on their boats and became the source of legends about gods who came from the sea. Most were simply lost, drowned along with their cities and their knowledge. It sounds like mythology, like the story of Atlantis that Plato wrote about 2,400 years ago. But here's the thing about Atlantis. Plato didn't invent it. He said he heard the story from Egyptian priests, who said it was already thousands of years old in their time. He described an island civilization that was destroyed by a catastrophe in a single day and night. Scholars have spent centuries trying to find it, looking in the wrong places, treating it as pure fiction. But what if Atlantis wasn't one city? What if it was a network? A civilization spread across coastlines around the world, connected by sea routes, sharing knowledge and trade? When the ice melted and the oceans rose, that network would have been destroyed. Not in one day, but over centuries. The cities that survived would have been cut off from each other. The knowledge would have fragmented. The memory would have faded into legend. The Austrian researcher began to believe she was looking at the remnants of something real. Not a fantasy, not a single lost island, but an entire chapter of human history that had been erased. First by nature, when the rising seas drowned the evidence. Then by time, as survivors scattered and their stories became myths. And finally by intention, as later powers decided the truth was too dangerous to share. The Khafru weren't supposed to exist, but the evidence was there, scattered across the ocean floor, buried in restricted archives, hidden in plain sight in stories people had been telling for 10,000 years. Someone had been keeping this secret, and the researcher was about to find out why. They didn't just lose the knowledge, they burned it, on purpose. Again and again, across centuries and continents, someone made the decision to destroy what humanity had learned. And when you look at the pattern, When you see how many times it happened and who was behind it, you start to realize something disturbing. This wasn't accident. This wasn't war. This was erasure. Systematic, deliberate, and almost complete. The Library of Alexandria is the most famous example. Everyone has heard of it. The greatest collection of knowledge in the ancient world, destroyed by fire. But here's what most people don't know. It wasn't destroyed once. It was attacked over and over across 400 years by different groups with different reasons. And each time, specific types of documents were targeted. The library was founded around 300 BCE in Egypt, during the reign of the Ptolemaic dynasty. At its peak, it held somewhere between 400,000 and 700,000 scrolls. Works of philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, history. Texts from Greece, Persia, India, and places even further away. Scholars came from all over the ancient world to study there. It was the closest thing humanity had to a universal archive. The first major attack came in 48 BCE, when Julius Caesar's troops set fire to ships in the harbor, and the flames spread to buildings near the library. How much was lost then is still debated. Some historians say it was just a warehouse of books waiting to be cataloged. Others say the main library was badly damaged, but the destruction continued. In 270 CE, the Emperor Aurelian fought a battle in Alexandria, and the library district was devastated. In 391 CE, a Christian mob led by the bishop Theophilus destroyed the Serapeum, a temple that housed part of the library's collection. They weren't just destroying pagan religion. They were specifically targeting texts that contradicted church teachings about the age of the world and the origins of humanity. The final blow came in 642 CE, when Arab forces conquered Alexandria. According to some accounts, the caliph ordered the remaining books burned, saying that if they agreed with the Quran, they were unnecessary, and if they disagreed, they were dangerous. Scholars debate whether this actually happened, but by that point, most of the library's treasures were already gone. 400 years of destruction. Different attackers, different religions, different empires. But the result was the same. Hundreds of thousands of documents representing the accumulated knowledge of the ancient world reduced to ashes. The Austrian researcher found something in those Vatican archives that put this in a new light. A catalog written in the 400 CE that listed texts which had been removed from Alexandria before the final destructions, not saved randomly. Selected specifically, documents about astronomy that described the movements of stars over periods of hundreds of thousands of years. Medical texts that discussed techniques unknown to later civilizations. Maps that showed coastlines and continents that didn't match the known world. Historical records that pushed human civilization back thousands of years before accepted timelines. These documents weren't destroyed. They were taken, moved to private collections, to monasteries, to vaults beneath churches that were being built on the ruins of older temples. The public destruction of Alexandria was real, but behind it, a quieter operation was happening. Someone was deciding what humanity was allowed to remember and what had to be forgotten. This pattern repeated everywhere the researcher looked. In 213 BCE, the Chinese Emperor Qin Shi Huang ordered the burning of books and the execution of scholars. The official reason was to consolidate his power and eliminate competing philosophies. But the texts that were most aggressively targeted weren't political. They were historical. Records of dynasties before the official timeline. Accounts of visitors from across the sea. Descriptions of technologies and knowledge that supposedly came from ancestors who lived in a previous age. The emperor didn't burn everything. He kept copies of certain forbidden texts in his imperial library, restricted to his inner circle. When his dynasty fell, some of those texts vanished. Others were supposedly taken by scholars who fled to remote regions. But the public record was cleansed. Chinese history began where the emperor decided it should begin. In 1562, In the Yucatan Peninsula, a Spanish bishop named Diego de Landa did something that still makes historians sick to think about. He gathered every Maya book he could find and burned them in a massive bonfire. Thousands of codices, written on bark paper, representing centuries of Maya knowledge. Astronomy, mathematics, history, medicine, religion, all of it gone in a single afternoon. De Landa called them works of the devil. He said they contained superstition and lies. But surviving accounts suggest he was disturbed by something specific in those books. The Maya had astronomical records that tracked events over periods far longer than European scholars thought possible. They had calendars that extended hundreds of thousands of years into the past. They had stories about previous worlds that had existed before this one, populated by different kinds of people who had been destroyed by catastrophes. Only 4 Maya codices survived. 4 out of thousands. And even those 4 contain astronomical and mathematical knowledge that modern researchers are still trying to fully understand. The Maya calculated the length of the solar year more accurately than the Europeans who conquered them. They tracked the cycles of Venus with an error of just 2 hours over 5 centuries. They did mathematics with a sophistication that wouldn't be matched in Europe for another 1,000 years. Where did that knowledge come from? The Maya themselves said it was inherited, passed down from ancestors who had survived the destruction of an earlier world. The same story the Sumerians told. The same story found in India, in China, in the myths of peoples on every continent. De Landa burned the evidence, but he kept a few things for himself. Documents that were later sent to Spain and eventually acquired by the Vatican. The researcher found references to a 5th Maya Codex, one that had never been made public. According to the records, it contained observations of astronomical events that supposedly happened 400,000 years ago. Events recorded with such precision that they could only have been made by people who were actually watching the sky at that time. That codex has never been seen. It may still exist, somewhere in a private collection or a sealed archive. Or it may have been destroyed after all, deemed too dangerous even to hide. The British did the same thing in India during the colonial period. They removed thousands of Sanskrit manuscripts from temple libraries. Texts on astronomy, medicine, mathematics, history. Many of these documents were shipped to England, where they sat in private collections or institutional archives, never translated, never studied. Others simply disappeared. Colonial officials wrote reports saying that Indian civilization was primitive, that everything of value had come from outside influence. Meanwhile, they were literally stealing the evidence that proved otherwise. Sanskrit texts described surgical techniques that wouldn't be rediscovered in Europe until the 1900s. They contained mathematical concepts that preceded their supposed Western inventors by centuries. They recorded historical events that pushed Indian civilization back thousands of years before the colonial timeline allowed. This wasn't ignorance. This was policy. If colonized peoples had sophisticated ancient civilizations, it undermined the entire justification for colonialism. So the evidence had to disappear. The researcher began to see a pattern stretching across all of human history. Every time a new power rose, every time a new religion took control, every time someone wanted to reshape the world according to their vision, the first thing they did was burn the books, destroy the memory, erase whatever came before. But they never destroyed everything. There were always pieces that survived, fragments hidden by scholars who risked their lives, texts buried in caves or sealed in jars, objects that ended up in the wrong collection, mislabeled, forgotten, waiting to be rediscovered. And there were always people who knew, guardians who passed the secrets down through generations, waiting for a time when the truth could finally be told. The researcher was about to meet one of them. Not everyone who hides the truth is evil. Some of them believe they are protecting us. They have watched civilizations rise and fall. They have seen what happens when powerful knowledge falls into the wrong hands. And they made a choice generations ago to become the guardians of secrets that humanity might not be ready to know. The Austrian researcher spent months following threads from those Vatican documents. Names appeared again and again. Not individual people, but families. Bloodlines that could be traced back centuries, sometimes over 1,000 years. These families held positions in libraries, universities, museums, and religious institutions across Europe and the Middle East. They were never the most famous or powerful people. They were the ones who worked in the background. The archivists, the translators, the curators. The ones who decided what got preserved and what got forgotten. She made contact with one of them in Istanbul. The city had been a crossroads of knowledge for over 2,000 years. First as Byzantium, then as Constantinople, then as Istanbul. When the Roman Empire split, Constantinople became the guardian of Greek learning, while Western Europe fell into chaos. When Constantinople fell to the Ottomans in 1453, scholars fled with whatever texts they could carry, spreading ancient knowledge into Italy and sparking the Renaissance. Every major transfer of hidden documents in European history had passed through the city at some point. The man she met was old, past 80, but still sharp. He lived in a modest apartment in a neighborhood that tourists never visited. His family had been in Istanbul for 11 generations. Before that, they had been in Constantinople. Before that, they had served in the library of the Byzantine emperors. And before that, according to family records, they had been custodians in Alexandria. 11 generations of hiding things. 11 generations of deciding what the world was allowed to see. He didn't trust her at first. People had come before, he said. Journalists looking for a story. Treasure hunters looking for artifacts to sell. Government agents looking for leverage. He had learned to recognize them. He had learned to say nothing. But she had something that changed his mind. The photographs from the Vatican. The list of hidden documents. Names and descriptions that matched records his own family had kept for centuries. She wasn't guessing. She had found real evidence. And that meant she was either very dangerous or exactly the kind of person he had been waiting for. He showed her something that night. A fragment of bronze covered in tiny gears and inscriptions. It looked like a broken piece of machinery, green with age, encrusted with mineral deposits from centuries underwater. She recognized it immediately. It looked like a piece of the Antikythera mechanism. The Antikythera mechanism is one of the most mysterious objects ever recovered from the ancient world. It was found in 1901 in a shipwreck off the coast of a Greek island. When researchers finally figured out what it was, decades later, they couldn't believe it. It was a computer. An analog computer made of bronze gears designed to predict astronomical events. The positions of the sun and moon, the timing of eclipses, the cycles of the Olympic Games. It was built around 100 BCE, and nothing even close to its complexity would be made again for over 1,000 years. Historians call it an anomaly, a one-of-a-kind genius invention that was somehow lost and never replicated. But the old man in Istanbul told her a different story. The fragment he held was not from the Antikythera wreck. It came from a different device, recovered from a different location, centuries earlier. His family had documentation showing that mechanisms like this were not rare in the ancient world. They were manufactured. There was a guild of craftsmen based in Alexandria and later in Rhodes, who made these devices for wealthy patrons across the Mediterranean. The knowledge to build them came from older sources, much older. Texts that described the movements of stars and planets with a precision that seemed impossible for the time. The guild was destroyed in the 1st century CE, not by accident, by deliberate action. Roman authorities saw these devices as a threat, not because of what they could do, but because of what they represented. They were proof that astronomical knowledge existed which contradicted the official religious calendar. They showed that the universe operated according to mathematical laws that anyone could calculate, not divine whims that only priests could interpret. The craftsmen were killed or scattered. Their workshops were burned. The devices that had been sold to wealthy families were confiscated and destroyed, almost all of them. A few survived, hidden by people who understood their value. The one found at Antikythera was on a ship carrying Greek treasures to Rome when it sank. It was being transported as a curiosity, a trophy. The Romans who took it probably didn't even understand what it was. The old guardian's fragment was different. It had been saved deliberately, hidden with documentation that explained what it meant. His family had kept it for almost 2,000 years, passing it down with strict instructions. Never sell it. Never show it to authorities. Wait for the right time. He told the researcher something that stayed with her long after she left Istanbul. He said that his family was not alone. There were others like them, scattered across the world. Families and small groups who had dedicated themselves to preserving knowledge that powerful institutions wanted destroyed. They didn't coordinate much. It was too dangerous. But they knew of each other. They had ways of passing information when necessary. These guardians didn't agree on everything. Some believed the hidden knowledge should be released gradually as humanity became ready for it. Others believed it should stay hidden forever, that the same catastrophes that destroyed ancient civilizations could happen again if people learned too much too fast. Some had lost faith entirely, wondering if their long vigil served any purpose at all. But they all agreed on one thing. The suppression wasn't driven by a single conspiracy. It was an emergent pattern, arising whenever knowledge threatened power. Religious authorities suppressed anything that contradicted Scripture. Political authorities suppressed anything that challenged their legitimacy. Academic authorities suppressed anything that would require them to rewrite the textbooks and admit they had been wrong. Each group had different reasons, but the effect was the same. The past was edited, the truth was buried, and anyone who dug too deep was quietly pushed aside. The researcher asked the old man why. Why go to so much trouble across so many centuries? What was so dangerous about knowing that civilization might be older than we thought? That ancient people might have had technologies we don't fully understand? What would actually happen if everyone knew? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said something she didn't expect. He said the knowledge itself wasn't the danger. It was what came with the knowledge. The hidden texts didn't just describe technologies and astronomical observations. They described events, catastrophes that had happened before, cycles of destruction that seemed to repeat, and predictions based on those cycles about what might happen again. The people who suppressed this knowledge weren't just protecting their power. Some of them genuinely believed they were preventing panic. If people knew that civilizations had been wiped out before, that it could happen again, that there might be patterns predicting when and how, what would they do? Would they come together and prepare? Or would they tear each other apart, fighting over resources and safety? The Guardians had debated this question for generations, and they had never reached an answer. But something had changed recently. The old man could feel it. The systems of suppression that had worked for centuries were starting to fail. Technology was making it harder to hide things. Satellite images revealed structures that should have stayed buried. Genetic testing uncovered migrations and populations that didn't fit the official story. Independent researchers, connected by the internet, were sharing information faster than anyone could contain it. The buried past was rising, whether humanity was ready or not. And the old guardians were facing a choice they had always hoped to avoid. Keep hiding the truth and watch it leak out in chaos and confusion. Or step forward finally and help the world understand what was coming. The researcher left Istanbul with more questions than answers. But she also left with something else. A name. A location. The place where the most important hidden documents had been taken when Constantinople fell. A monastery in a remote corner of Europe, where monks had guarded secrets for 500 years. She was getting closer to the center of the web, and she wasn't sure she was ready for what she would find there. The truth doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It seeps in slowly, through cracks in walls that were built to last forever. And right now, all over the world, those walls are crumbling. The buried past is rising whether anyone is ready for it or not. The only question left is what we do when it finally breaks through. The Austrian researcher traveled to the monastery the old guardian had told her about. It sat in a remote mountain region, far from any major city, accessible only by roads that turned to mud in winter and dust in summer. The monks there had maintained their community for over 500 years, surviving wars and revolutions and regimes that tried to close them down. They kept to themselves. They asked nothing from the outside world. And according to the guardian in Istanbul, they protected documents that had been carried out of Constantinople the night before it fell. She spent 3 weeks there. The monks didn't trust outsiders, and she had to prove herself before they would show her anything. She worked in their gardens. She ate their simple food. She attended their prayers, even though she didn't share their faith. Slowly, they began to talk to her. The abbot was a man in his 70s who had spent his entire adult life in that monastery. He had never used the internet. He had never owned a phone. But he knew more about ancient history than most university professors. His knowledge came from texts that academics had never seen. Texts that told a different story about where humanity came from and what it had been through. He showed her the vault. It was carved into the mountain behind the monastery, sealed with doors that took 3 different keys held by 3 different monks. Inside were shelves of documents, some of them over 1,000 years old. Scrolls and codices and loose pages written in Greek, Latin, Arabic, Hebrew, and languages she didn't recognize. Maps that showed coastlines different from anything in modern atlases. Diagrams of machines she couldn't understand. Astronomical charts tracking stars over periods of tens of thousands of years. But the most important thing he showed her wasn't a document. It was a stone tablet about the size of a dinner plate, covered in writing that predated any known alphabet. The monks didn't know exactly how old it was. The scholars who had examined it over the centuries couldn't agree. Some said it was 5,000 years old. Some said it was much older than that. The tablet had been translated, partially by generations of monks working with other ancient texts. The abbot read her the translation they had assembled. It was incomplete, full of gaps and uncertainties. But the meaning was clear enough. It described a cycle, a pattern that repeated over vast stretches of time. Civilizations rose, reached a peak, and then fell. Not because of politics or economics or moral decay. Because of events beyond human control, cosmic events. Changes in the sun, shifts in the Earth's position, catastrophes that came in waves, separated by thousands of years, predictable if you knew what to look for. The tablet said there had been at least 4 great civilizations before the current one. Each had developed knowledge of the cycle. Each had tried to prepare for the next catastrophe. Each had failed, at least partially. But each had also passed something on. Fragments of knowledge, hidden in places designed to survive the destruction, waiting to be found by whoever came next. The researcher thought about everything she had learned. The underwater cities, the impossible artifacts, the astronomical knowledge that seemed too advanced for its time, the stories of floods and fire that appeared in every ancient culture. It all fit the pattern described on that tablet. Humanity had been here before. We had built civilizations before, and we had lost them over and over across tens of thousands of years. The abbot told her something else. He said the current period of stability was coming to an end, not tomorrow, not next year, but within the span of a few generations. The same forces that had destroyed previous civilizations were building again. The signs were there for anyone who knew how to read them. Changes in climate, instability in the sun, shifts in the Earth's magnetic field. The ancient astronomers had tracked these things. They had left warnings. And for thousands of years, those warnings had been hidden by people who were afraid of what would happen if the public knew.